In 2010, researchers examining a sperm whale carcass found something that stopped them cold. Wrapped around the whale's jaw, embedded into the skin, some pieces still attached to tissue, were the suckers of a giant squid. Not small ones, each sucker was ringed with teeth, and the scars they left behind were deep. This whale had been in a fight, a real one, in complete darkness under pressure strong enough to collapse steel, at a depth where no human has ever been, and survived without a vessel around them. And whatever happened down there, it was not quick and it was not clean. Here is what makes that remarkable. The whale won. Sperm whales are the largest predators on Earth with teeth. An adult male can reach 18 meters, longer than a city bus, heavier than a loaded truck. But size is not what makes them extraordinary. Plenty of large animals are clumsy, slow, inefficient hunters. Sperm whales become better the deeper they go, not slightly better, measurably, dramatically better. Researchers tracking their dives have found that hunting precision increases with depth. Movement becomes more controlled, paths become more direct, success rates climb, even as the environment becomes darker, colder, and more crushing with every meter of descent. They are operating at their absolute peak in the most hostile place on the planet. To understand why, you need to understand what the deep ocean actually does to a living body. Because the pressure down there is not an obstacle the sperm whale works around. Something about that pressure, that darkness, that cold, that total sensory isolation appears to activate something in them. Their heart slows to almost nothing. Their blood shifts toward their vital organs. Their muscles stop relying on oxygen the way yours do right now, and their sonar, already the most powerful biological sound system ever studied, becomes sharper, more focused, more lethal. They do not descend into the deep ocean despite what waits there. They descend because of it. Before we continue, if you enjoy calm, curiosity-driven science like this, consider leaving a like and subscribing. It helps this small corner of the internet continue to grow. I'm curious, is this one of those quiet late-night listens, or are you exploring some science during the day? Where you are? Let me know in the comments. Let's continue. At the surface, the sperm whale carries its enormity with an almost quiet restraint, as if much of what defines it is held in reserve. The body appears simple at a distance, a long dark form rising and falling with the rhythm of the open sea. Yet beneath that outline exists a structure shaped by demands that extend far beyond what the surface ever requires. An adult male stretches to lengths that seem disproportionate even among giants, its head alone forming nearly a third of its total body. Inside that immense structure rests one of the largest brains known, dense and folded, built not only for coordination, but for processing a world that rarely offers light. The lower jaw, narrow and lined with heavy conical teeth, contrasts with the bulk above it, giving the animal a shape that feels both deliberate and unusual, as though every feature has been adjusted toward a purpose not immediately visible. Near the surface, however, those adaptations remain mostly hidden. Movement is slower here, less precise, shaped by the openness of water that offers space without resistance. Individuals rise to breathe, exhaling in a brief angled burst before drawing in air that will soon be carried downward. In these moments, their lives appear almost gentle. Groups form loose patterns, especially among females and younger whales, drifting together in stable social units that persist across years. There is recognition here, memory, a continuity of association that binds individuals into something more than solitary hunters. Sound travels between them in softer exchanges, not the intense pulses used in the depths, but quieter signals that maintain cohesion. Calves remain close, learning not through urgency, but through proximity, following movements that will later become instinctive. The surface allows for this, a space where time stretches slightly, where survival is not measured in seconds, but in patterns repeated over days and seasons. Yet even in these calmer layers, a limit is always present. The act of breathing defines it. Unlike fish, whose exchange with water is continuous, the sperm whale must return again and again to the air above. Each breath taken at the surface is both a renewal and a constraint, setting the duration of everything that follows. Oxygen fills the lungs, binds to blood and muscle, stored with an efficiency that hints at what is to come, but it remains finite. This requirement shapes their entire rhythm. Periods at the surface are not idle pauses, but necessary preparations. Beneath the skin, systems begin to shift even before the descent starts. The body anticipates the absence of air, adjusting in ways that will only fully reveal themselves deeper below. What appears calm is already part of a larger cycle, one that moves between two environments that could not be more different. When the whale finally leaves the surface, the change is immediate but not abrupt. The descent begins with a steady angle, the massive tail lifting once before slipping beneath. What remains above disappears quickly, leaving no trace except a fading disturbance in the water. The social world, the open light, the relative ease of movement all recede in moments. And still, the need to return remains embedded in every action that follows. No matter how far the whale travels into darkness, no matter how well its body adapts, the surface continues to exist as a distant requirement, drawing it back with a certainty that cannot be ignored. In this balance between air and depth, the sperm whale exists in two states at once, one visible and familiar, the other unfolding far below, where the true extent of its design begins to emerge. Water does not change all at once. It shifts gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, as depth increases and the conditions that shape it begin to separate into distinct worlds. What appears from above as a single continuous body is in practice divided into layers that behave differently, each governed by light, pressure, and the quiet movement of heat. Closest to the surface lies the region where sunlight still reaches with strength. Here, energy from the sun filters downward, carrying warmth that keeps the water in slow circulation. Tiny organisms drift in this illuminated space, converting light into life, forming the base of a system that supports everything above and just below. Visibility extends far enough for shapes to be recognized, for movement to be tracked with relative ease. The water feels open, connected, influenced directly by the sky above it. As depth increases, that connection begins to thin. Light does not disappear immediately, but it weakens, losing intensity with every meter. Colors fade in a predictable order, longer wavelengths vanishing first, until only faint traces remain. This transition creates a boundary that is not fixed, but always present, a gradual shift where the ocean begins to behave less like a surface environment and more like something separate. Below this threshold, the twilight zone forms, a region defined not by complete darkness, but by limitation. Light exists here only as a dim, scattered presence, insufficient for clarity. Shapes become uncertain, distances harder to judge. Organisms that occupy this space adjust accordingly, relying less on sight and more on other forms of perception. Movement becomes more deliberate, not because the water resists, but because information does. Temperature follows its own gradient through these layers. Near the surface, warmth is maintained by constant exposure to sunlight, but deeper down, that warmth fades. A thermocline forms, a zone where temperature drops more rapidly, creating a subtle barrier that influences how water mixes. Above it, currents shift with the wind and weather. Below it, movement slows, becoming more stable, less affected by surface conditions. Pressure, unlike light or temperature, increases steadily without pause. Every descent adds weight, compressing the water and everything within it. This change is uniform, predictable, and unavoidable, yet its effects become more pronounced as depth grows. Structures that function easily near the surface must withstand entirely different forces below, and this difference alone separates the layers as much as light or temperature ever could. Deeper still, beyond the reach of even the faintest light, the ocean becomes something else entirely. Darkness here is complete, not a dimming, but an absence. There is no visual reference, no horizon, no distinction between above and below except through motion. Life continues in this space, but it does so under conditions that remove the influence of the sun almost entirely. Energy arrives indirectly, carried down from above, or generated through processes that do not depend on light. Each of these layers is defined by what is available and what is not. Light, warmth, and visibility diminish, while pressure and isolation increase. The result is not a single environment that deepens, but a sequence of environments, each with its own constraints and possibilities. Movement between them is not simply a change in position, it is a transition between systems, where the rules governing behavior shift with depth. What works in one layer becomes less effective in the next, requiring adjustments that are not optional but necessary for survival. Within this structure, the ocean reveals itself not as a uniform expanse, but as a vertical landscape, shaped as much by absence as by presence, extending downward into conditions that diverge further with every meter. Light enters the ocean with quiet certainty, spreading across the surface before slipping downward in a steady, narrowing path. At first, its presence feels unchanged, as if the brightness above simply continues below. But this continuity is brief. Within a short descent, the water begins to take it apart, filtering and reshaping it in ways that are gradual yet irreversible. The process is not uniform. Different wavelengths fade at different rates, and the spectrum begins to thin almost immediately. Reds vanish first, absorbed within the upper layers, followed by oranges and yellows. What remains shifts toward cooler tones, until blue dominates, not because it is stronger, but because it travels farther before being scattered into nothing. Even this persistence has limits. With increasing depth, the blue itself weakens, losing intensity until it becomes a dim, indistinct presence. This reduction happens faster than distance alone might suggest. Water, though clear in small volumes, becomes a barrier when extended over tens of meters. Tiny particles suspended throughout it, along with the natural properties of the liquid itself, scatter light in multiple directions. What continues downward is no longer direct illumination, but a diluted version, fragmented and softened, carrying less information with every meter. As this shift continues, the environment begins to change in subtle but important ways. Edges lose definition. Contrast decreases. Objects that would be distinct near the surface start to blend into their surroundings, their outlines dissolving into gradients of shadow. Depth perception becomes less reliable as the visual cues that define distance weaken or disappear entirely. In this emerging dimness, the eye still functions, but with growing limitation. Photoreceptors adapt as much as they can, increasing sensitivity to capture what little light remains, yet this adjustment comes at a cost. Greater sensitivity reduces clarity. Fine detail is sacrificed in favor of detecting faint signals, and even then, those signals arrive incomplete. The visual world becomes quieter, less precise, shaped more by suggestion than certainty. Movement within this space adds another layer of complexity. As light scatters, it creates a uniform background that reduces contrast between objects and the water around them. A moving form does not always stand out clearly. It can appear as a shifting absence rather than a defined presence. Tracking becomes more difficult, not because the object is hidden, but because the medium itself interferes with how it is seen. The angle of light also changes as it penetrates deeper. Near the surface, illumination arrives from above in a direct and predictable way, casting gradients that help orient space. Below, that directionality fades. Light becomes more diffuse, arriving from multiple angles after being scattered, reducing the sense of up and down that vision depends on. Orientation begins to rely less on sight and more on other cues. At a certain point, the remaining light no longer provides usable detail. It exists, but it does not inform. Shapes dissolve into silhouettes, and silhouettes into vague shifts in brightness. The environment transitions into one where vision continues in a technical sense, yet fails in a practical one. Seeing becomes less about identifying and more about detecting, less about clarity and more about presence. This threshold is not marked by a clear boundary, but by a gradual loss of reliability. There is no moment when vision stops, only a point where it ceases to guide effectively. Beyond this, the ocean continues, carrying what little light remains downward until it fades completely, leaving behind a space where sight, though still possible in theory, no longer defines how the world is understood. The descent reaches a point where the surface no longer feels connected, not because it has vanished entirely, but because its influence has thinned beyond usefulness. In this band of water, the last workable traces of light linger without offering clarity, and it is here that the whale begins to shift from transit into intention. This region occupies a range that sits between familiarity and absence, often beginning a few hundred meters below and extending downward into deeper obscurity. It is not yet the complete darkness found farther below, but it carries enough limitation to alter how movement and perception function. For a sperm whale, this is where purposeful hunting begins to take shape, not at the extremes, but within this transitional space where uncertainty becomes a constant condition. The visual world here has already softened into something incomplete. Edges no longer hold their definition, and distance becomes difficult to measure with precision. Shapes appear and dissolve without warning, not because they are hidden, but because the medium itself interferes with their stability. In such conditions, reliance on sight begins to recede, not as a sudden abandonment, but as a gradual recognition that it can no longer be trusted to guide action alone. As the whale moves through this depth, its behavior reflects this shift. The long, sweeping motions seen closer to the surface begin to narrow, becoming more deliberate. Each movement carries a quiet economy, as if unnecessary motion has been filtered out. The body aligns with a steadier rhythm, one that favors consistency over variation, reducing the chance of miscalculation in an environment where feedback is limited. Sound begins to take on greater significance, though it does not yet dominate entirely. Early pulses of echolocation move outward, returning fragments of information that supplement what little vision remains. These signals are not constant, but they appear with increasing frequency, as if the whale is calibrating itself to a new mode of perception. Each returning echo offers a suggestion of space, a faint outline of objects that do not reveal themselves to the eye. Prey within this zone is present, but not easily located. Many species here have adapted to the same uncertainty, developing forms of camouflage that rely on transparency, dim bioluminescence, or movement patterns that minimize detection. They exist within the same limitations, shaped by the same fading light, and this shared constraint creates an environment where encounters depend on precision rather than chance. The whale's descent through this region is not rushed. It moves with a controlled pace, allowing its senses to adjust as the conditions continue to shift. Muscles respond with measured force, avoiding abrupt changes in direction. The path becomes more direct, less exploratory, as if guided by a growing confidence in signals that are no longer visual. There is also a subtle change in posture. The body holds a steadier orientation, minimizing unnecessary rotation, keeping its forward axis aligned with its direction of travel. This stability supports the increasing reliance on sound, allowing emitted clicks to project cleanly and return without distortion caused by erratic movement. Within this depth range, the whale exists between two systems. The last remnants of light still provide fragments of visual input, yet those fragments are no longer sufficient on their own. At the same time, the sensory mechanisms that will dominate deeper down are still refining their role, building toward full reliance. The result is a period of adjustment, where behavior becomes more focused without becoming rigid. The whale does not abandon one method in favor of another. It transitions, blending diminishing sight with strengthening sound. Each descent through this zone reinforces that balance, gradually shifting the center of perception away from light and towards something that does not depend on it. In this quiet interval between brightness and darkness, the foundations of deeper hunting are set into motion, shaped by conditions that reward precision and steady control over everything else. There is a point beneath the surface where the human body, as it exists naturally, begins to lose its ability to function, not gradually in the way light fades, but through a steady accumulation of force that presses inward from all directions. This force is pressure, and in water it increases with a consistency that allows no pause, adding weight with every meter of descent. At relatively shallow depths, the body can still compensate. Air spaces within the lungs, ears, and sinuses adjust as external pressure rises, equalizing through small shifts that keep structures stable. Beyond a certain threshold, however, these adjustments become insufficient. The air within the lungs compresses, reducing volume and altering the way gases behave within the bloodstream. Nitrogen, normally inert at the surface, begins to dissolve more readily into tissues, changing how the nervous system responds. Even before reaching extreme depths, clarity of thought can begin to shift, replaced by a subtle disorientation that grows with continued descent. Breathing itself becomes a limitation. Without an external supply of pressurized air, the lungs cannot provide oxygen once submerged, setting a strict boundary on how long a human can remain below. Freedivers extend this boundary through training, slowing their heart rate and conserving oxygen, but even these adaptations remain temporary. The body is not designed to store large reserves of oxygen, and once those reserves are depleted, function declines rapidly. Pressure also acts directly on the structure of the body. The chest cavity, supported by bone and muscle, resists compression to a point, but beyond that point, the force becomes overwhelming. Without protection, the lungs would collapse, and the delicate exchange of gases required for survival would cease. This is why deep human exploration depends on technology, on rigid vessels or specialized suits that create an artificial environment, maintaining internal pressure while isolating the body from the surrounding force. Even with such support, limits remain. Materials can withstand only so much compression before failing, and the transition between pressures must be managed carefully. Ascending too quickly after a deep dive can cause dissolved gases to form bubbles within the bloodstream, a condition known as decompression sickness. This risk imposes strict controls on movement, turning ascent into a measured process rather than a simple return. In contrast, the sperm whale moves through these depths without such constraints. Its body does not rely on maintaining internal air spaces in the same way. As it descends, its lungs compress naturally, reducing the volume of air and limiting the absorption of nitrogen into the bloodstream. Gas exchange becomes minimal, not because it is unnecessary, but because oxygen has already been stored elsewhere, within the blood and muscles, bound to molecules that release it slowly over time. The ribcage itself is not rigid in the way a human chest is. It yields under pressure, allowing the body to adapt rather than resist. This flexibility prevents damage, turning what would be a destructive force into something the whale can accommodate. Circulatory adjustments further support this process, directing oxygen toward vital organs while reducing flow to areas where it is less immediately needed. Where a human requires separation from the environment to survive, the whale integrates with it. Pressure does not represent a barrier that must be held back, but a condition that has been accounted for in every aspect of its design. The same forces that limit one form of life are absorbed seamlessly by another, allowing movement through depths that remain inaccessible without assistance. This contrast does not arise from a single difference, but from a collection of adaptations that align the whale with an environment that remains fundamentally incompatible with the human body, no matter how carefully it is approached. Long before the descent reaches its deeper stages, the preparation has already begun within the body, unfolding quietly and without visible signal. What appears from the outside as a simple dive is, internally, a coordinated shift across multiple systems, each adjusting to extend time in a place where breathing is not possible. Oxygen, once taken in at the surface, does not remain confined to the lungs for long. In most mammals, the lungs serve as the primary reservoir, but in a sperm whale, that role is redistributed. The blood carries a higher concentration of hemoglobin, binding oxygen more densely than in terrestrial species. Muscles, in turn, contain elevated levels of myoglobin, a protein that stores oxygen directly within the tissue. This arrangement allows oxygen to be held where it will be used, rather than relying on continuous exchange through breathing. As the dive progresses, these reserves are drawn upon gradually. The release is not uniform but controlled, matching the reduced pace of activity that defines movement at depth. This efficiency ensures that oxygen is not consumed too quickly, preserving function over extended periods. The body does not attempt to maintain surface-level metabolism. Instead, it shifts toward conservation, aligning usage with availability. At the same time, the heart begins to slow. This response, known as bradycardia, reduces the rate at which oxygen is circulated, extending the duration of the available supply. The slowing is significant, far beyond what would occur during rest at the surface. Each beat becomes more deliberate, spaced further apart, lowering overall demand while maintaining essential circulation. This reduction in heart rate is accompanied by changes in blood distribution. Not all tissues receive the same level of supply during a dive. Blood flow is prioritized toward vital organs, particularly the brain and heart, where function must remain uninterrupted. Peripheral areas, including portions of the muscles and skin, receive less, entering a state of reduced activity that conserves oxygen for where it is most needed. The effect is a form of internal triage, a reallocation that ensures survival under constraint. Muscles continue to function, but they rely more heavily on stored oxygen and, when necessary, shift toward metabolic pathways that do not depend on immediate oxygen supply. This produces byproducts that will later need to be processed, but during the dive, the priority remains clear: sustain operation for as long as possible. These adjustments are not reactive in the moment. They are built into the physiology of the animal, triggered automatically as depth increases. The transition is smooth, without interruption, allowing the whale to move from one state to another without hesitation. What might be stressful or dangerous for other organisms becomes routine, a repeated sequence that unfolds with each descent. There is also a balance maintained between conservation and performance. While oxygen use is reduced, it is not minimized to the point of limiting capability. The whale continues to navigate, detect, and pursue, supported by systems that provide just enough energy to sustain these actions without excess. This balance is precise, refined through countless cycles of descent and return. Over time, these physiological patterns form a rhythm that defines the dive itself. Oxygen is taken in, stored, distributed, and gradually depleted, all within a framework that maximizes duration without compromising function. The body operates as a closed system during this period, relying entirely on what it carries within. When the ascent eventually begins, these processes reverse. Circulation redistributes, heart rate increases, and oxygen is replenished at the surface. Yet during the dive, the system remains self-contained, an internal environment carefully regulated to sustain life far from the air that made it possible. Beneath the increasing weight of the ocean, structure determines survival. The body must decide whether to resist or to yield, and in the case of the sperm whale, yielding becomes the more stable path. What appears solid from the outside carries an internal flexibility that allows it to move with pressure rather than against it. The rib cage, which in many mammals serves as a rigid frame to protect the lungs, behaves differently here. Its construction allows for controlled compression, the bones and connective tissues capable of bending inward as external force rises. This movement is not a failure of structure but a function of it, a designed response that prevents stress from concentrating in any one place. As the whale descends, the chest cavity reduces in volume without fracturing, adjusting smoothly to the surrounding conditions. Within this shifting space, the lungs respond in a way that would be harmful to most land animals but becomes protective in this context. Air is compressed as pressure increases, reducing the size of the lungs until they partially collapse. This collapse is not chaotic or damaging. It occurs in a predictable manner, guided by the elasticity of the tissue. The delicate alveoli, where gas exchange normally occurs, are shielded from excessive pressure by this process, preventing rupture. As the lungs compress, the role they play changes. Gas exchange becomes minimal, and the movement of gases into the bloodstream slows significantly. This shift has an important consequence for nitrogen, a gas that can create complications when absorbed in large amounts under pressure. In humans, prolonged exposure at depth allows nitrogen to dissolve into tissues, leading to instability when pressure decreases. In the sperm whale, the collapse of the lungs limits this absorption, reducing the amount of nitrogen that enters the body during the dive. Circulation supports this mechanism by redirecting blood away from the lungs as depth increases. With less blood flowing through areas where gas exchange occurs, there is less opportunity for nitrogen to be taken up. The body effectively isolates itself from a process that would otherwise introduce risk, maintaining internal stability even as external pressure continues to rise. The flexibility of the ribcage also contributes to maintaining buoyancy control. As the lungs compress and their volume decreases, the overall density of the body changes, allowing the whale to descend with less effort. There is no need to fight against trapped air or resist the surrounding force. Instead, the body aligns with it, becoming more streamlined in both shape and function, As it moves deeper, tissues throughout the body are adapted to withstand compression without damage. Fluids, which are largely incompressible, help maintain structural integrity at a microscopic level, while connective tissues distribute force evenly. There is no single point where pressure concentrates enough to cause failure because the entire system is built to absorb it collectively. These adaptations work together as a unified response, each part supporting the others. The ribcage yields, the lungs compress, circulation adjusts, and gas exchange diminishes. What might appear as a series of separate mechanisms is, in practice, a coordinated system that allows the whale to pass through increasing pressure without disruption. As depth continues to increase, these processes remain stable, repeating with each dive. The body does not resist the environment it enters. It transforms in subtle ways, aligning its structure with the conditions around it, allowing pressure to become a constant presence that is neither opposed nor feared, but integrated into the way the animal moves and survives. In the absence of reliable light, perception does not disappear, it rearranges itself. The ocean at depth offers little to the eyes, not because there is nothing present, but because the medium no longer carries the information needed to form clear images. Shapes dissolve into uniform darkness, and distance loses its meaning when there is no contrast to define it. Vision depends on light reflecting from surfaces and returning to the eye with enough structure to be interpreted. In deeper water, that structure breaks down. Even when faint traces remain, they arrive scattered and incomplete, unable to resolve detail. The eye continues to receive signals, but those signals no longer correspond to a coherent representation of space. Orientation through sight becomes unreliable, not through failure of the organ itself, but through the limitations of the environment. As this shift takes hold, another channel begins to dominate. Sound, which moves through water with far less loss than light, becomes the primary means of interacting with the surroundings. Where light is absorbed and scattered, sound travels with continuity, carrying information across distances that would render vision ineffective. The ocean, once visually expansive, becomes acoustically structured, filled with signals that extend outward and return with detail intact. For the sperm whale, this transition is not abrupt. The capacity for acoustic perception exists long before it becomes essential, gradually increasing in prominence as visual input diminishes. The head, already large and complex, houses specialized structures that generate and receive sound with precision. These structures allow the whale to produce focused pulses that move forward through the water, interacting with objects before returning as echoes. Each emitted pulse travels outward, spreading through the surrounding space until it encounters a boundary. When it does, part of the sound reflects back, carrying with it information about the object it has touched. The timing of the return indicates distance, while variations in intensity and frequency suggest size, shape, and composition. This process forms a kind of spatial awareness that does not rely on light, building a representation of the environment through sound alone. The medium itself enhances this method. Water conducts sound efficiently, allowing it to travel faster and farther than it would in air. This efficiency ensures that even small differences in returning echoes can be detected and interpreted. The whale does not perceive a single continuous sound, but a sequence of discrete signals, each one contributing to a growing understanding of what lies ahead. As reliance on this system increases, behavior adjusts to support it. Movement becomes steadier, reducing interference with the outgoing and incoming pulses. The body aligns with the direction of sound projection, maintaining a consistent orientation that allows echoes to return cleanly. There is a quiet coordination between motion and perception, each supporting the other without excess. The world constructed through sound is not visual in the conventional sense, yet it provides a level of detail that compensates for the absence of light. Objects are located, distances measured, and movements tracked through changes in returning signals. The environment, though unseen, becomes structured and navigable. In this transition, the role of sight does not vanish entirely, but it recedes into the background, no longer the primary guide. Sound takes its place, not as a substitute, but as a more reliable medium under these conditions. What was once a visually defined space becomes an acoustic one, where presence is determined not by light, but by the echoes that return through the water. A pulse leaves the head of the whale and enters the water not as a continuous tone, but as a brief, concentrated burst of energy. It lasts only an instant, yet within that instant is a force that ranks among the most intense biological sounds ever measured. These clicks are not casual signals. They are precise emissions, shaped and directed forward with remarkable control. Inside the head, a series of specialized structures focus the sound into a narrow beam. Air is forced through passages that convert pressure into vibration, which is then amplified and guided outward. The resulting pulse travels through the water with clarity, maintaining its shape over distance in a way that would be impossible in air. The medium supports it, carrying the energy forward with minimal loss, allowing it to reach far beyond the body that produced it. The intensity of these clicks can exceed 200 decibels when measured near the source, a level that, in other contexts, would be associated with mechanical or explosive events. Underwater, however, this energy disperses differently. The density of the water allows sound to propagate efficiently, spreading outward while retaining enough strength to return useful information. Each pulse moves outward, reflects, and comes back altered, carrying with it the imprint of whatever it encountered. This efficiency is central to how sound replaces sight. Where light fades and fragments, sound continues, threading through the water with consistency. The speed at which it travels, roughly 4 times faster than in air, compresses the delay between emission and return. This rapid exchange allows the whale to build a detailed sense of its surroundings, updating its perception with each successive click. As the whale approaches an object, the pattern of these clicks changes. Intervals shorten, pulses become more frequent, creating a sequence that narrows in both time and space. This progression increases the resolution of the returning echoes, refining the information available. The environment, though unseen, becomes sharply defined through these repeated interactions, each pulse adding another layer of detail. At close range, the intensity of the sound takes on an additional role. The energy carried by each click does not simply reflect. It interacts physically with the surrounding water and anything within it. Rapid pressure fluctuations accompany the passage of the wave, creating brief changes that can be detected not only through reflection, but through direct impact. Smaller organisms may experience this as a disturbance, a force that alters their orientation or movement. This effect is not constant, but it emerges when the distance between source and target decreases. The concentration of energy within the beam means that nearby objects are exposed to higher levels of pressure variation. While the primary function remains perception, the intensity introduces a secondary influence, one that can disrupt as well as reveal. The structure of the whale's head supports both aspects of this system. It shapes the outgoing sound, controls its direction, and receives the returning echoes with sensitivity. Layers of tissue and fluid guide the signal inward, translating vibration into information that can be processed with precision. There is no excess in this arrangement. Each component contributes to the clarity and strength of the signal. In this acoustic landscape, distance, size, and motion are all conveyed through sound. The loudness of the click is not simply a measure of power, but a requirement for maintaining detail across space. Without it, the returning echoes would be too faint to interpret, and the structure of the environment would remain indistinct. The result is a system where intensity and information are inseparable, where the loudest sounds serve not to overwhelm, but to illuminate a world that cannot be seen, shaping perception through waves that travel outward and return with quiet precision. Perception in this depth takes shape without relying on light, forming instead through patterns that arrive and return in measured intervals. Each pulse sent into the water becomes a brief extension of the body, reaching outward, touching what cannot be seen, and carrying that contact back as structured information. The process unfolds continuously. A click is released, and in the fraction of a second that follows, echoes begin to return. These echoes do not arrive as a single signal, but as a layered sequence, each reflection corresponding to a surface encountered along the path. The closest objects return first, followed by those farther away, creating a temporal arrangement that reflects spatial order. Distance is not observed but calculated through delay, each interval marking the separation between the whale and its surroundings. Within these returning signals, subtle variations carry additional detail. Differences in intensity suggest the density of an object, while changes in frequency indicate texture or internal structure. A smooth surface reflects sound differently than a complex one, and these distinctions are preserved within the echo. Over repeated pulses, this information accumulates, forming a representation that becomes increasingly refined. This representation is not visual in the conventional sense, yet it provides a coherent sense of space. The whale does not see outlines or colors, but it perceives position, movement, and form through changes in sound. Objects are not illuminated, but revealed through interaction, each echo contributing to a growing map that exists entirely within the acoustic domain. Movement through this environment enhances the clarity of that map. As the whale advances, new angles of reflection emerge, altering the returning signals in predictable ways. These changes allow for the reconstruction of three-dimensional structure, as if the environment is being traced from multiple perspectives. The result is a dynamic model that updates with each emitted pulse, adjusting continuously as conditions shift. Prey detection within this system depends on recognizing patterns that differ from the surrounding water. A moving organism produces a distinct signature, its motion altering the timing and frequency of returning echoes. Even small changes become noticeable when repeated across successive pulses, allowing the whale to isolate a target within a field that would otherwise appear uniform. At greater distances, the challenge lies in maintaining clarity as the signal weakens. Each pulse loses some energy as it travels outward and back, reducing the strength of the returning echo. To compensate, the whale adjusts the intensity and frequency of its clicks, ensuring that enough information returns to be interpreted. This adjustment is not static but responsive, shifting as needed to preserve resolution across varying ranges. As the distance closes, the precision increases. The sequence of clicks becomes more rapid, narrowing the intervals between pulses. This acceleration refines the incoming data, allowing finer distinctions to be made. The position of the target can be tracked with increasing accuracy, its movement predicted through the pattern of changing echoes. Throughout this process, There is a continuous exchange between emission and reception, each informing the next. The outgoing pulse is shaped by what has already been detected, and the returning echo modifies the subsequent emission. This feedback loop creates a form of perception that is both active and adaptive, responding to the environment in real time. In the absence of light, this system provides a complete framework for interaction. Space is defined through timing, form through variation, and motion through change. The environment, though invisible, becomes structured and navigable, its details revealed not by illumination, but by the consistent return of sound shaped by everything it encounters. From above, the deeper ocean has long been imagined as a vast emptiness, a place where little moves and even less survives. This impression comes not from direct observation, but from distance, from the difficulty of reaching a world where light no longer guides the eye. Yet absence of visibility is not absence of life. It is simply a limit on how that life is perceived. Below the layers where illumination still lingers, the water holds movement that does not announce itself in obvious ways. Organisms here are not evenly distributed, nor do they remain in constant view. They drift, rise, descend, and scatter, forming patterns that shift over time. Many follow vertical migrations, ascending toward higher layers and returning again, creating a continuous exchange between depths that would otherwise seem disconnected. Among these movements are animals of significant size, some capable of rapid motion despite the constraints of their environment. Squid, in particular, occupy this space with a form that balances flexibility and speed. Their bodies are built for propulsion, expelling water to generate sudden bursts of movement, allowing them to traverse distances quickly when necessary. They do not remain still, nor do they rely on passive existence. They move with purpose, adjusting their position in response to both opportunity and threat. This presence alters the structure of the deep ocean. Rather than a uniform field, it becomes a dynamic environment where encounters depend on timing and precision. Prey is not abundant in the sense of constant availability, but it is present in ways that require active engagement. The whale does not descend into a void. It enters a system where movement must be detected, tracked, and intercepted. Energy in this environment is distributed unevenly. There are moments of relative scarcity, followed by intervals where multiple organisms occupy the same region. These fluctuations create a pattern that rewards persistence and accuracy. A missed opportunity is not easily replaced, as the next may not appear within the same proximity or time frame. This uncertainty shapes behavior, encouraging strategies that maximize the likelihood of success when a target is found. The adaptations described earlier, the shift toward sound, the controlled movement, and the efficient use of oxygen all align with this reality. They are not abstract capabilities, but responses to a space where passive feeding is not sufficient. The whale must locate prey that is often in motion, respond to changes in direction and close distance within a limited window. Speed alone does not define these interactions. While some prey can accelerate quickly, their movements are often reactive, triggered by incoming signals or disturbances in the water. The whale, by contrast, operates with a broader awareness, detecting targets before direct contact occurs. This allows for positioning that reduces the need for extended pursuit, turning the encounter into a brief, decisive sequence. The deep ocean, then, is structured not by emptiness, but by subtle distribution. Life exists in pockets, in shifting layers, in patterns that require interpretation rather than simple observation. It is a place where presence is intermittent yet meaningful, where the absence of constant activity does not equate to a lack of interaction. Within this framework, hunting becomes a necessity shaped by conditions rather than abundance. The whale does not rely on chance encounters alone. It engages with an environment that demands attention, where each descent carries the potential for success but offers no guarantee. The perception of barrenness fades when considered through this lens. What appears empty from a distance reveals itself, upon closer understanding, as a system defined by movement, timing, and the quiet persistence of life distributed across a space that resists easy observation. Marks sometimes remain where direct observation does not. On the skin of a sperm whale, these marks appear as pale circles or deep impressions, arranged in patterns that do not match any known feature of the whale itself. They are traces left by contact, preserved long after the moment has passed, offering a record of encounters that occur far beyond the reach of light. These impressions correspond to the suckers of large squid, each one edged with a ring of hardened structures that can grip and hold with considerable force. When pressed against the whale's skin, they leave behind a distinct signature, one that can be measured and compared. The size of these marks indicates the scale of the animal that made them, revealing prey that is not only substantial, but capable of resisting capture. The giant squid exists within the same depths the whale regularly enters, occupying a space where visibility is limited and encounters are rarely witnessed directly. Its body is built for that environment, long tentacles extending outward, equipped with suckers that can secure contact in an instant. Movement is driven by jets of expelled water, allowing for sudden acceleration, brief but effective when evasion is required. Evidence of these interactions extends beyond external markings. Examination of stomach contents has revealed remains that confirm the squid's role as a primary component of the whale's diet. Beaks, resistant to digestion, persist where softer tissues do not, accumulating as durable fragments that indicate repeated consumption. Each recovered piece represents an encounter that unfolded entirely outside human observation, yet left behind a trace that can be studied. Despite this indirect evidence, direct glimpses of these interactions remain rare. The depths in which they occur limit visibility, and the conditions make prolonged observation difficult. Occasional recordings have captured brief moments, outlines of forms moving through darkness, the suggestion of contact rather than its full sequence. These fragments align with what the physical evidence suggests, but they do not provide a complete view. The interaction itself is shaped by the abilities of both animals. The whale approaches with a system designed to detect and track through sound, building a detailed awareness of the squid's position. The squid, in turn, responds with rapid movement and the use of its tentacles, attempting to maintain distance or establish contact that could disrupt the approach. The resulting encounter is not prolonged in the way surface observations might suggest, but concentrated, unfolding within a narrow span of time. The marks left behind indicate that contact does occur, that the squid is capable of reaching the whale's head and body, applying force through its suckers. Yet these marks also suggest that such resistance is ultimately overcome. The whale's structure, its size, and its method of detection allow it to maintain control of the interaction, even when met with opposition. In the absence of continuous observation, these conclusions are drawn from accumulation. Scars, stomach contents, and occasional recordings combine to form a consistent picture. Each source contributes a piece, and together they outline a relationship that is both frequent and largely unseen. Within the deeper layers of the ocean, where direct evidence is limited, These traces serve as the primary record of interaction. They reveal a connection between predator and prey that is defined not by visibility, but by the persistence of physical signs. Through them, the presence of the giant squid becomes clear, not as an isolated curiosity, but as a central element in the life of the sperm whale, shaping behavior through encounters that leave their mark long after they have ended. There comes a depth where the last traces of ambient light no longer contribute anything usable, and perception settles fully into a different form. In this space, there is no distinction between shadow and form, no contrast to separate one object from another. The environment exists, but not in a way that can be interpreted visually. Movement continues, interactions unfold, yet none of it is guided by sight. Within this condition, timing becomes a central structure. Each action is placed within a sequence that depends on precise intervals, measured not in distance seen, but in signals sent and received. A pulse leaves the whale, travels outward, and returns with information that is immediately integrated into the next movement. There is no pause between perception and response, only a continuous exchange that shapes direction and speed. The absence of visual cues removes any reliance on broad scanning or passive observation. Instead, the whale must actively construct its awareness through repeated emission of sound. Each click becomes a deliberate extension, probing the surrounding space and defining it moment by moment. The environment is not revealed all at once, but assembled through accumulation, each returning echo, adding to a structure that remains fluid and constantly updating. This process requires stability. Rapid or unnecessary motion would distort the outgoing signals and interfere with the clarity of their return. The body therefore moves with controlled precision, maintaining alignment so that each pulse travels cleanly and each echo arrives without disruption. The relationship between movement and perception becomes tightly linked, each dependent on the other for accuracy. Prey detection within this darkness depends on recognizing patterns within the returning signals. A target is not seen approaching, but inferred through changes in timing and frequency. Even slight variations become significant when repeated across successive pulses. A consistent shift in echo delay may indicate movement toward or away, while fluctuations in intensity suggest changes in orientation or distance. As the whale closes in, the sequence of clicks accelerates. The intervals between emissions shorten, increasing the rate at which information is gathered. This rapid exchange allows for finer adjustments, refining the position of the target with each cycle. The process narrows the margin for error, guiding the whale toward a precise interception point. Accuracy becomes essential because the opportunity for correction is limited. Without visual confirmation, there is no secondary system to verify position at close range. The final moments of approach depend entirely on the reliability of the acoustic information that has been gathered. Any deviation must be corrected immediately through the next pulse, leaving no room for hesitation. The prey, moving within the same darkness, may respond to disturbances in the water or incoming signals, altering its path in unpredictable ways. This introduces additional complexity, requiring the whale to adjust continuously. The interaction becomes a dynamic exchange, where both movement and detection are in constant flux. Throughout this sequence, there is no single moment where the environment becomes clear in a traditional sense. Instead, clarity emerges through consistency, through the alignment of repeated signals that converge on a stable interpretation. The whale does not wait for certainty to appear. It builds certainty through repetition, each pulse reinforcing or refining what came before. In this complete absence of light, hunting is not diminished, but transformed. The process becomes one of continuous calibration, where timing, sound, and motion combine to replace vision entirely. The environment remains unseen, yet fully engaged with, its structure defined not by what is visible, but by what returns through the water in measured intervals. Motion, as depth increases, begins to lose its excess. What might once have included variation or unnecessary adjustment is gradually refined into something quieter, more measured, shaped by conditions that reward control over speed. The surrounding water does not resist more strongly in a simple sense, yet the cost of movement changes, and with it, the way the body chooses to move. Each descent carries a finite reserve of energy, and every action draws from it. There is no opportunity to replenish until the surface is reached again, so the pattern of motion becomes carefully balanced. The tail moves with steady, deliberate strokes, spaced in a rhythm that avoids waste. Between these strokes, the body glides, allowing momentum to carry it forward without additional effort. This alternation between propulsion and stillness extends the duration of the dive, conserving energy while maintaining direction. The path itself becomes more direct. Rather than drifting or adjusting frequently, the whale follows a controlled trajectory, minimizing deviations that would require correction. Small changes in angle are made smoothly, without abrupt turns, keeping the body aligned with its intended course. This consistency supports both movement and perception, allowing internal systems to operate without interruption. As depth increases, buoyancy begins to shift. The compression of air within the body reduces its overall volume, changing how it interacts with the surrounding water. This gradual change allows the whale to descend with less active effort over time. There is a point where gravity and density assist the movement downward, reducing the need for continuous propulsion. The body, once requiring active force to move deeper, begins to settle into a controlled glide, guided by subtle adjustments rather than strong strokes. During this phase, motion becomes even more restrained. The tail may pause for longer intervals, with only occasional movements to maintain orientation or correct direction. The descent is no longer driven by force alone, but by alignment with the changing conditions of the body itself. Energy that might have been spent on propulsion is preserved for later use when active movement becomes necessary again. This conservation extends beyond the descent. When the time comes to return upward, the process is not simply reversed with equal intensity. The ascent is managed with the same attention to efficiency, balancing the need to reach the surface with the remaining energy reserves. Movements are controlled, avoiding rapid acceleration that would increase metabolic demand. The body rises steadily, guided by a rhythm that maintains stability throughout the change in depth. Throughout both phases, there is an absence of abruptness. The transitions between active movement and passive glide are smooth, almost unnoticeable, creating a continuous flow rather than a sequence of distinct actions. This continuity reduces strain, allowing systems within the body to operate within predictable ranges. The surrounding environment reinforces this approach. Without visual cues to prompt sudden reactions, movement remains internally guided, shaped by timing and consistency rather than immediate external changes. The whale does not react to what it sees, but to what it interprets through other means, allowing its motion to remain steady even as conditions shift. In this way, movement becomes an extension of the broader adaptations that support life at depth. It is not defined by strength or speed alone, but by restraint, by the careful distribution of effort across time. Each stroke, each glide, contributes to a pattern that preserves energy while maintaining control, allowing the whale to move through increasing depth with a precision that reflects the environment it inhabits. Velocity in this environment carries less value than placement. Movement can be fast, but without accuracy, it leads past rather than toward. The deeper layers reward a different balance, where the ability to arrive at the exact position of a moving target outweighs the advantage of covering distance quickly. Within this space, both predator and prey exist in motion, not along a flat plane, but through a volume that extends in every direction. Up, down, forward, and lateral movement combine into a three-dimensional field where position is constantly shifting. Tracking within this field requires more than following a line. It demands continuous adjustment to changes that occur across multiple axes at once. The whale approaches this complexity through a system that prioritizes alignment over acceleration. Each returning signal provides information about distance and direction, allowing the whale to refine its path in small increments. Rather than rushing toward the last known position of a target, it adjusts toward where the target is likely to be when contact is made. This distinction reduces the need for sudden corrections, keeping movement smooth and controlled. Speed, when used, appears in short, focused bursts rather than sustained pursuit. These bursts are timed to coincide with moments when the position of the prey has been resolved with sufficient clarity. The majority of the approach, however, unfolds at a measured pace, allowing for constant recalibration. The whale closes distance not by overwhelming the target with force, but by reducing the space between them with precision. The structure of the acoustic information supports this approach. Each sequence of echoes reveals not only current position, but also movement patterns. Changes in timing and frequency across successive pulses indicate direction and velocity, allowing the whale to project the path of the target forward. This projection forms the basis of predictive hunting, where the interception point is calculated in advance rather than discovered through trial. As the gap narrows, these predictions become more refined. The intervals between pulses decrease, increasing the rate at which information is updated. This rapid exchange allows the whale to track even subtle changes in movement, adjusting its own trajectory in response. The process is continuous, each adjustment building on the last, maintaining alignment as both predator and prey move through the water. The prey, capable of sudden shifts in direction, introduces variability into this system. Its movements are not always linear, and rapid changes can alter the expected path. The whale compensates by maintaining flexibility within its own motion, avoiding commitment to a single trajectory until the final moments. This adaptability ensures that adjustments can be made without losing overall control. In this context, speed without accuracy would lead to overshooting, requiring additional effort to correct. Each correction would consume energy and time, reducing the efficiency of the hunt. By prioritizing precision, the whale minimizes these corrections, conserving resources while maintaining a higher likelihood of successful contact. The final approach reflects this balance. Movement remains controlled until the distance is sufficiently small, at which point acceleration may increase briefly to complete the interception. Even then, the motion is directed and contained, guided by the most recent information rather than by momentum alone. Across repeated dives, this method reinforces itself. Successful outcomes depend not on how quickly the whale can move, but on how accurately it can position itself relative to a moving target. The environment, lacking visual confirmation and filled with shifting signals, favors this approach, shaping behavior toward a form of hunting where precision defines success more reliably than speed ever could. Pressure does not announce itself with a visible change, yet it is present in every direction, applying a steady force that increases without interruption. It does not fluctuate or recede, and because of this constancy, it becomes one of the most defining elements of behavior at depth. Movement, orientation, and decision-making all take shape within its influence. As the surrounding force grows, it alters how the body interacts with the water. Every motion must account for the density and compression that accompany increasing depth. There is less tolerance for irregularity, as sudden or inefficient movements introduce instability that must be corrected. These corrections require additional effort, and in an environment where energy is limited, unnecessary expenditure becomes a liability. The whale's motion reflects this constraint through consistency. Each action is measured, aligned with the conditions imposed by pressure. The body maintains a steady form, avoiding abrupt shifts that would disrupt balance. This steadiness is not imposed externally but emerges from the interaction between structure and environment, where the cost of deviation encourages precision. Pressure also influences the margin for error during hunting. In shallower conditions, a missed attempt might be followed by another opportunity within a short distance. At depth, the situation changes. The combination of limited oxygen, dispersed prey, and the effort required to reach these layers reduces the number of viable attempts within a single dive. Each approach carries greater significance, not because the prey is more difficult in isolation, but because the context limits repetition. This constraint shapes behavior toward efficiency. Movements that do not contribute directly to locating or intercepting a target are minimized. The path taken is more direct, the adjustments more controlled. The whale does not explore widely within this space. It operates within a narrower range of motion, guided by information that must be used effectively. The surrounding pressure reinforces this approach by affecting how quickly changes can be made. While the body is adapted to withstand compression, rapid shifts in direction or speed introduce forces that must be countered. Maintaining stability requires that these shifts remain within controlled limits, encouraging smoother transitions rather than abrupt maneuvers. This influence extends to the timing of actions. Decisions are made within a framework where delay carries a cost. The longer a target remains unengaged, the more energy is expended maintaining position and tracking. Pressure does not directly dictate these decisions, but it creates the conditions under which they are evaluated. The environment narrows the range of viable responses, favoring those that resolve quickly and efficiently. Within this system, efficiency becomes closely tied to survival. The resources carried into the dive are finite, and the ability to convert those resources into successful outcomes determines how often the cycle can be repeated. Pressure, by increasing the cost of inefficiency, acts as a constant filter, shaping behavior toward patterns that conserve energy while maintaining effectiveness. The result is a form of movement and decision-making that appears calm and controlled, yet is defined by underlying constraints. Each action fits within a narrow margin, balanced between the need to act and the need to conserve. There is little excess, little variation that does not serve a purpose. Over time, these patterns become consistent. The whale does not adjust to pressure in a conscious sense. It moves within it, its behavior aligned with conditions that allow only certain approaches to remain effective. In this alignment, pressure becomes more than a physical force. It becomes a guiding influence, shaping the way the animal moves, hunts, and navigates through a space where efficiency is not optional, but necessary for continuation. Voices that carry easily near the surface begin to lose their function as depth increases. not because sound itself disappears, but because the conditions that support shared awareness begin to separate. What once connected individuals into a coordinated group gradually narrows into something more individual, shaped by distance, timing, and the demands of the environment. Near the surface, social structure forms through consistent interaction. Individuals remain within a range where signals can be exchanged without delay, maintaining awareness of one another's position and movement. Patterns emerge from this proximity: coordinated travel, shared responses, and the quiet continuity of a group that moves as a loosely connected whole. These interactions rely on stability, on the ability to remain within a space where communication can be maintained without interruption. As the descent deepens, that stability becomes harder to sustain. Each individual follows its own path downward, and the spacing between them increases. The need to move efficiently, to align with internal rhythms of oxygen use and sensory focus, reduces the feasibility of maintaining close formation. Signals that might still travel through the water do not always align with the immediate needs of hunting, and the timing of those signals becomes less reliable as distances grow. The nature of communication itself begins to shift. Sounds that serve social cohesion near the surface differ from those used for perception at depth. The focused pulses used for navigation and detection are directed forward, aligned with movement, and not intended for broad distribution. Their structure supports clarity of return rather than shared reception, making them less suited for maintaining group awareness. In this environment, the individual becomes the primary unit of action. Each whale operates within its own perceptual field, guided by the information it gathers directly. Coordination, in the sense of synchronized movement or shared targeting, becomes less prominent. The spacing between individuals reduces overlap in sensory signals, preventing interference and allowing each to maintain a clear acoustic environment. This separation does not imply a loss of social structure, but rather a temporary shift in its expression. The bonds that exist near the surface remain, yet they are not actively reinforced during the dive. Instead, the focus turns inward toward the immediate task of locating and capturing prey within a limited time frame. Solo hunting patterns emerge naturally from these conditions. Without the need to maintain alignment with others, movement can be optimized for individual efficiency. Decisions are made based on local information, without the delay that coordination would require. This autonomy allows for rapid adjustment, essential in a space where targets may appear briefly and move unpredictably. The reduction in group coordination also minimizes complexity. Multiple individuals operating in close proximity could create overlapping signals, complicating interpretation. By dispersing, each whale preserves the clarity of its own acoustic field, ensuring that incoming information remains distinct and usable. As the dive progresses, this isolation becomes more complete. The surrounding space, already lacking visual reference, offers little indication of other individuals beyond occasional distant signals that do not require immediate response. The environment narrows to what is directly perceived, reinforcing the focus on individual action. When the ascent begins and the surface draws closer, these conditions gradually change. Distances shorten, signals become easier to exchange, and the patterns of social interaction re-emerge. Yet, during the time spent at depth, communication yields to necessity, and the coordinated presence of the group gives way to a quieter, more isolated mode of existence, shaped by the demands of a space where efficiency and clarity take precedence over connection. Orientation, as it is known near the surface, depends on reference. There is a sense of direction shaped by light, by the horizon, by subtle gradients that indicate position without effort. In deeper water, these references fall away entirely, leaving behind a space that offers no fixed points, no visible structure against which movement can be measured. Without landmarks, distance becomes abstract. There is no shoreline, no variation in terrain that signals progress. The environment extends outward in all directions with a uniformity that resists easy interpretation. Movement continues, yet it is no longer framed by surroundings that define where one is or where one is going. Instead, position must be inferred through internal processes, through the continuous interpretation of signals that replace visual confirmation. This absence of structure creates a form of openness that differs from what is experienced above. At the surface, openness still carries a sense of boundary, defined by the sky and the curvature of the water. Below, that boundary dissolves. There is no visible separation between layers, no indication of depth beyond what is sensed internally. The space feels continuous, not in a way that expands outward visibly, but in a way that removes limits from perception. Within this setting, movement does not follow paths in the conventional sense. There are no routes marked by features, no patterns imposed by the environment itself. Each trajectory is self-defined, guided by information that is gathered moment by moment. The whale moves through this space without external reference, maintaining direction through consistency rather than visual alignment. The scale of this openness influences behavior. Actions become more deliberate, not only because of physical constraints, but because the absence of landmarks removes the cues that would otherwise prompt adjustment. There is no sudden recognition of proximity to an object, no visual signal that demands immediate change. Instead, adjustments arise from interpretation, from the gradual accumulation of data that informs position and movement. This shift alters the experience of space itself. What might be perceived as distance near the surface becomes less defined here. Without visual markers, the concept of far or near is translated into intervals of time, measured through the delay of returning signals rather than through apparent size or clarity. The environment is understood through duration, through how long it takes for information to arrive and be processed. The lack of light further reinforces this transformation. Without illumination, there is no contrast to separate one area from another. The environment does not present itself in layers of brightness or shadow, but as a consistent absence that offers no variation. This uniformity removes any visual hierarchy, leaving all directions equally undefined. Within this condition, the whale maintains orientation through internal stability. The body holds a consistent alignment, preserving direction without relying on external cues. Movement is guided by continuity, by maintaining a steady course rather than reacting to visible changes. This approach allows navigation through a space that offers no immediate feedback. The psychological dimension of this environment, though not conscious in a human sense, reflects this absence of external structure. Behavior becomes centered on internal systems, on the reliable processes that replace what is no longer available. The whale does not depend on the environment to define its position. It carries that definition within its own sensory framework. In this way, the deep ocean exists as a different world, not because it lacks content, but because it lacks the familiar elements that shape perception near the surface. It is a space defined by absence of reference, where orientation, distance, and direction emerge from within rather than from what can be seen around. Time at depth is measured not only in minutes, but in how steadily energy can be preserved across them. Every movement, every adjustment draws from a supply that cannot be renewed until the surface is reached again. This constraint shapes the entire structure of the dive, turning energy from a background requirement into a central condition that defines what is possible. The reserves carried into the descent are carefully distributed. Oxygen stored within blood and muscle supports function, but it is linked directly to how energy is produced. As these reserves are used, the capacity for sustained movement gradually narrows. The body responds by regulating effort, ensuring that consumption remains aligned with what can be maintained over time. This regulation is visible in the pacing of activity. Movement remains controlled, avoiding unnecessary acceleration or prolonged exertion. The whale does not pursue continuously, nor does it react to every potential signal. Instead, it selects moments where engagement is most likely to succeed, conserving energy during intervals that do not offer clear opportunity. Within this framework, the outcome of each hunting attempt carries greater weight. A successful capture replenishes energy, offsetting the cost of the dive. A failed attempt, however, represents more than a missed opportunity. It reflects energy spent without return, reducing the margin available for continued activity. As depth increases, the ability to absorb repeated failures diminishes, reinforcing the importance of each decision. The environment contributes to this balance by limiting the frequency of encounters. Prey is present, but not in a way that allows for constant interaction. Time may pass between detections, requiring the whale to maintain readiness without expending unnecessary effort. This balance between activity and restraint ensures that energy is not depleted before an opportunity arises. Efficiency becomes the guiding principle within these conditions. Actions are evaluated not only by their immediate effect, but by their contribution to the overall success of the dive. Movements that conserve energy while maintaining position are favored, as are approaches that minimize the need for extended pursuit. The whale aligns its behavior with strategies that reduce waste, allowing more of its resources to be directed toward moments that matter. This emphasis on efficiency extends to how the whale processes information. Signals are used to refine position and movement with minimal delay, reducing the need for repeated adjustments. Each pulse contributes to a clearer understanding of the environment, allowing decisions to be made with confidence rather than through repeated trial. As the dive progresses, the remaining energy reserves influence the range of possible actions. The whale must balance the desire to continue searching with the need to return before those reserves are exhausted. This balance is not abrupt but gradual, shaping the timing of the ascent in a way that ensures the journey can be completed safely. Throughout this process, there is a continuous alignment between energy use and behavior. The body does not simply respond to the environment. It operates within limits that require constant adjustment. Each movement, each decision, reflects an awareness of what remains available and what must be preserved. In this setting, energy is not an abstract concept but a tangible boundary. It defines how long the whale can remain, how actively it can hunt, and how many opportunities it can pursue. The deeper the descent, the more clearly this boundary emerges, guiding behavior toward a form that balances conservation with action, ensuring that each dive remains sustainable within the limits imposed by the body itself. A dive begins with a reserve that is already diminishing. From the moment the whale leaves the surface, the supply of usable oxygen starts to decline, not abruptly, but with a steady certainty that continues without pause. There is no way to slow this process beyond the limits already built into the body no way to extend it indefinitely. Every second spent below is part of a fixed interval that cannot be reset until the ascent is complete. This creates a quiet form of pressure that exists alongside the physical conditions of depth. Time is not measured externally, but internally, through the gradual use of stored oxygen. As this reserve decreases, the range of possible actions narrows. The whale cannot remain indefinitely, cannot explore without limit, cannot delay without consequence. Each movement takes place within a window that is always closing. Within this constraint, hunting becomes a sequence shaped by timing. The whale must locate, approach, and capture prey before its available oxygen reaches a threshold where continued activity becomes unsustainable. This sequence cannot be extended through hesitation. Delays reduce the margin available for success, compressing the remaining time into a smaller and more demanding interval. The environment reinforces this urgency. Encounters with prey are not continuous, and the time required to locate a target can vary. There may be periods where signals return without indicating a clear opportunity, followed by moments where a target appears within range. The whale must remain prepared for both conditions, conserving energy during absence while responding efficiently when presence is detected. Failure within this context carries a cost that extends beyond the immediate moment. A missed interception represents time spent without return, reducing the remaining oxygen available for further attempts. The whale cannot simply continue indefinitely in search of another opportunity. Each unsuccessful approach narrows the remaining window, increasing the pressure on subsequent actions. As the dive progresses, the balance between searching and returning begins to shift. The whale must evaluate whether enough time remains to pursue another target or whether it must begin its ascent. This evaluation is not conscious in a human sense, but it is reflected in behavior, in the gradual transition from active hunting to preparation for return. The approach to prey reflects this constraint through decisiveness. Movements are aligned toward a clear outcome, minimizing ambiguity. There is little space for exploratory behavior once a target has been identified. The whale commits to the approach with the expectation that it must be resolved within the available time. The prey, moving within the same environment, introduces variability that cannot be fully controlled. Sudden changes in direction or speed can alter the expected outcome, requiring immediate adjustment. These adjustments must be made within the limits imposed by the remaining oxygen, leaving little tolerance for extended correction. As oxygen levels continue to decline, physiological responses intensify. The heart rate remains low, circulation remains focused, yet the margin for continued exertion decreases. The body signals the need to return, not through abrupt change, but through a gradual narrowing of capacity. In this setting, the stakes of each dive become clear. Success provides the energy needed to sustain future descents, while failure reduces the resources available for continuation. The cycle depends on maintaining a balance where successful hunts offset the cost of repeated dives. The risk is not expressed through sudden danger, but through the steady progression of time and the limits it imposes. Each dive carries this structure within it, a sequence defined by a beginning at the surface, a period of activity below, and an end that must be reached before the reserves are exhausted. Within that sequence, every action contributes to an outcome that cannot be delayed beyond what the body can sustain. Action at depth narrows into moments where delay cannot be absorbed. The sequence that leads from detection to contact unfolds within limits that leave little space for reconsideration. When a target is identified, the interval available for response is already constrained by distance, movement, and the diminishing reserve that supports the dive. Hesitation, in this context, does not appear as a visible pause, but as a slight misalignment between perception and movement. A delay of even a fraction of a second alters position, allowing the target to shift beyond the predicted point of interception. Because the environment offers no visual confirmation to compensate, this shift can move the opportunity out of reach entirely, requiring a new approach that may not be possible within the remaining time. The whale's response to this constraint is reflected in the speed of its decisions. Information gathered through returning signals is not held or reconsidered. It is integrated and acted upon in a continuous sequence. Each update in position leads directly to an adjustment in movement, maintaining alignment without interruption. The process does not involve separate stages of observation and reaction, but a single flow where perception becomes motion almost immediately. This immediacy supports a form of commitment that is essential to successful hunting at depth. Once the trajectory toward a target is established, the whale maintains that course with minimal deviation. Adjustments are made to refine the approach, but the overall direction remains stable. This consistency reduces the risk of losing alignment, ensuring that each movement contributes to closing the distance rather than introducing new uncertainty. The environment reinforces this behavior by limiting the number of viable opportunities within a single dive. There is no surplus of encounters that would allow for repeated hesitation. Each potential capture must be treated as significant, not because of its size alone, but because of the time and energy invested in reaching it. This context shapes the intensity of the approach, not as an expression of excess force, but as a necessary alignment of action with constraint. Prey, capable of rapid response, introduces variability that must be met with equal precision. Sudden changes in direction or speed require immediate adjustment, and the whale's ability to respond depends on maintaining a continuous flow of information and movement. Any interruption in this flow reduces the accuracy of the approach, increasing the likelihood of failure. The resulting interaction carries a quality that can be described as focused rather than uncontrolled. Movement accelerates when needed, but it remains directed, guided by the most recent information available. There is no broad surge of motion, only a narrowing of action toward a specific point in space where interception is expected to occur. This focus is supported by the systems that have been established throughout the dive. The regulation of energy, the distribution of oxygen, and the refinement of movement all contribute to a state where decisive action can be taken without hesitation. Each element aligns to support a brief period where commitment to the approach must be complete. In this setting, what might be described as aggression emerges not from an increase in force, but from the absence of delay. The whale does not escalate its behavior beyond necessity. It removes the intervals that would otherwise separate detection from action. The approach becomes direct, continuous, and resolved within the limits imposed by the environment. As the interaction concludes, the pattern resets, returning to a state of measured movement and conservation. Yet within those brief moments of engagement, the alignment of perception, decision, and motion reflects a system shaped by conditions where hesitation carries a cost that cannot be absorbed, and commitment becomes the most reliable path to success. At very close distances, the character of the whale's acoustic pulses begins to change, not in their purpose, but in how their energy interacts with what lies ahead. What travels outward as a structured signal for perception also carries force, and when that force is concentrated within a narrow range, it produces effects that extend beyond reflection alone. As the whale approaches a target, the sequence of clicks becomes more rapid and more tightly spaced. The intervals shorten, creating a near continuous stream of pulses that overlap in time. Each individual click still functions as a unit of information, but together they form a dense field of sound, focused forward and sustained long enough to influence the immediate space around the prey. The intensity of these pulses, already high at their source, remains concentrated within this forward beam. At close range, there is little distance for the energy to disperse, allowing the full strength of each click to interact directly with the surrounding water and any organism within it. This interaction produces rapid fluctuations in pressure, small in scale yet occurring in quick succession, creating a localized environment that is dynamically changing. Observations of prey behavior suggest that these conditions can affect movement. Squid, when exposed to intense acoustic pulses, have been seen to alter their orientation or slow their motion, though such observations are limited and often indirect. The exact mechanism remains uncertain, yet the pattern indicates that the presence of strong, repeated sound can influence how these animals respond in the final moments before contact. The structure of the squid's body may contribute to this effect. Its tissues are largely soft, with fluid-filled compartments that can transmit pressure changes efficiently. Rapid fluctuations introduced by incoming sound waves may create disturbances within these structures, not damaging in a permanent sense, but sufficient to interfere with coordinated movement. The result is a brief reduction in responsiveness, a narrowing of the prey's ability to adjust its position effectively. At the same time, the whale continues to refine its approach through the same pulses. The returning echoes, now arriving almost instantly due to the reduced distance, provide highly detailed information about the target's position. This dual role of sound, both as a means of perception and as a source of physical influence, emerges naturally from the intensity and frequency of the clicks rather than from a separate mechanism. The possibility that sound contributes to the final stage of capture does not replace the importance of precision. The whale does not rely on this effect alone, nor does it generate sound for the sole purpose of disruption. Instead, the intensity required for accurate close-range detection produces conditions that may also reduce the prey's ability to evade. This alignment between perception and influence reflects the efficiency seen throughout the dive. A single system performs multiple functions, not through added complexity, but through the way its properties interact with the environment. The same pulses that define space also shape it, introducing subtle changes that can affect the outcome of the interaction. The extent of these effects remains an area of ongoing study. Direct observation at the depths where these encounters occur is limited, and much of the understanding comes from combining behavioral patterns with physical analysis of sound and tissue response. What is clear is that the intensity of the whale's clicks at close range is sufficient to produce more than reflection alone. Within the final moments of a hunt, this concentration of sound becomes part of the overall process, not as a separate action, but as an extension of the system already in use. The environment responds to the presence of these pulses, and within that response, the conditions for successful capture are subtly shaped by the very signals that make detection possible. Distance narrows to a point where separation is no longer measured across open space, but within a small, shifting interval that changes with each fraction of a second. The approach, shaped by careful alignment and steady correction, compresses into a final phase where movement accelerates and precision must hold under increasing intensity. At this range, the flow of information becomes almost continuous. Pulses are emitted in rapid succession, and their returns arrive with minimal delay, forming a dense sequence that updates position in near real time. The whale's path adjusts within this stream, each correction smaller and more immediate, reducing the gap between perception and motion until they begin to overlap. The prey, now within close proximity, responds with its own rapid changes. Sudden shifts in direction, brief accelerations, and attempts to alter depth introduce variability that must be matched instantly. The interaction becomes dynamic, with both bodies moving through a confined space where each adjustment influences the next. Movement, which earlier unfolded with restraint, now carries a sharper edge. The tail drives stronger strokes, increasing speed while maintaining control. These strokes are not sustained for long periods but applied in focused bursts, timed to coincide with moments when alignment is most precise. Between them, the body continues to glide, preserving the continuity established during the approach. Orientation remains stable despite the increase in speed. The whale maintains a forward axis aligned with the target, avoiding rotations that would disrupt the flow of incoming information. This stability allows the acoustic field to remain clear, ensuring that each returning signal contributes directly to refining the position of the prey. As the gap continues to close, the distinction between separate movements begins to blur. The sequence of adjustments becomes so rapid that it forms a continuous curve rather than a series of discrete steps. The whale does not move toward a fixed point, but toward a point that shifts with the prey, maintaining alignment through constant recalibration. Contact occurs within this compressed interval. The final motion brings the whale into direct proximity, where the distance between them is reduced to almost nothing. The jaws open, guided by the last available information, and close around the target with a movement that completes the sequence established during the approach. This moment, though brief, represents the culmination of multiple processes working in coordination. The regulation of energy, the control of movement, and the refinement of perception all converge into a single action. There is no excess within it, no additional motion beyond what is required to secure the capture. The intensity of this interaction does not arise from duration, but from concentration. Everything that defines the hunt is condensed into a short span where precision must remain intact despite rapid change. Each system within the whale supports this moment, maintaining stability while allowing for the necessary increase in speed. Once contact is made, the interaction resolves quickly. The prey's movement ceases to influence the trajectory, and the whale returns to a more controlled pace. The rapid adjustments that define the final approach give way to steadier motion, aligning once again with the broader pattern of the dive. Within this brief convergence, the characteristics of the deeper environment are most evident. The absence of visual cues, the reliance on sound, and the constraints of time all shape the way the encounter unfolds. The final moments are not separate from the rest of the dive, but an intensified expression of it, where every element operates at its most focused level before returning to a quieter state. Records of descent do not come from direct observation, but from instruments that follow the whale into depths where light and visibility no longer apply. Small devices, attached briefly and later retrieved, trace the path downward, translating movement into data that reveals how far these dives extend and how long they persist. These records show that sperm whales regularly descend well beyond 1,000 meters, entering regions where pressure and darkness are complete. Some dives extend past 2,000 meters, reaching depths that approach the limits of what their physiology can sustain. These are not isolated events, but part of a pattern repeated across individuals and locations, indicating that such depths are within the normal range of their behavior. The duration of these dives reflects the balance between oxygen storage and energy use. A typical descent may last between 40 and 60 minutes, with variation depending on conditions and success during hunting. Some dives extend longer, surpassing an hour, though such durations appear less frequent. Each dive follows a general structure: a descent phase, a period spent at depth, and a return to the surface, yet the exact timing of each phase can shift. During the deepest portions, movement becomes even more controlled. The rate of descent slows as the whale approaches its target depth, transitioning into a phase where horizontal movement increases. This is where most hunting activity occurs, within a band where prey is present and conditions allow for effective detection. The whale remains within this zone for a limited time, constrained by the gradual depletion of oxygen. At these extreme depths, physiological adjustments reach their fullest expression. The heart rate remains reduced, circulation is tightly regulated, and oxygen is drawn steadily from stored reserves. The lungs, already compressed, contribute little to gas exchange, and the body operates within a state that prioritizes essential function while minimizing consumption. The surrounding pressure at these depths is immense, yet it is encountered as a constant rather than a sudden force. The whale's structure accommodates it through the adaptations described earlier, allowing tissues and internal spaces to adjust without damage. There is no moment where the pressure becomes a distinct event. It is present throughout, increasing steadily with depth. Sound continues to function as the primary means of perception. Even in these extreme conditions, acoustic signals travel effectively, allowing the whale to detect and track prey. The absence of light is complete, yet it does not interrupt the process of hunting. The environment remains accessible through sound, maintaining continuity with the systems used at shallower depths. As the dive approaches its limit, internal conditions begin to shift. Oxygen reserves decrease to a point where continued activity must be reduced. The whale transitions toward ascent, adjusting movement to conserve what remains. The upward path is controlled, not abrupt, ensuring that the return to the surface can be completed within the available resources. These deepest dives represent the outer boundary of the whale's capability, not a constant state, but a range that can be reached when conditions require it. Each descent into these depths follows the same underlying structure, shaped by the balance between available oxygen, energy use, and the distribution of prey. Through the data collected, a consistent picture emerges. The whale is capable of reaching depths and durations that extend far beyond what most air-breathing animals can sustain, yet it does so within a framework that remains stable and repeatable. The deepest dives are not exceptions to this pattern, but its most extended expression, revealing the limits of a system that operates reliably even at the farthest reaches of its range. Much of what is known about these dives exists as traces rather than direct observation. The depths involved place the whale beyond the reach of continuous human presence, and the conditions there do not allow for sustained visual study. Instead, understanding forms through fragments, pieces of information collected from instruments and interpreted after the animal has returned to the surface. Tags attached to the body record movement, depth, and sometimes sound, following the whale through its descent and back again. These devices provide a timeline of the dive, revealing how deep it goes, how long it remains, and how its motion changes across different phases. From this, patterns emerge, repeated shapes in the data that suggest where hunting occurs and how behavior shifts with depth. Acoustic recordings add another layer. The sequence of clicks, their spacing, and their intensity offer clues about what the whale is doing at different moments. A steady rhythm may indicate transit, while a rapid series of pulses suggests active tracking of prey. These changes in pattern allow researchers to infer behavior without seeing it directly, building a picture from sound rather than sight. Yet, these methods have limits. A tag records what happens to the animal, but not what surrounds it. The presence of prey is inferred from changes in behavior, not directly observed. The environment itself, its structure, its variability, remains largely unseen during these dives. Even when cameras are used, their range is restricted and the darkness limits what they can capture. Because of this, there are aspects of the interaction that remain uncertain. The exact sequence of movements during a hunt, the way prey responds in the final moments, and the subtle adjustments made by the whale are only partially understood. The data suggests patterns, but it does not fully reveal the process that produces them. There is also variability between individuals that is difficult to capture. Each whale may follow slightly different paths, adjust its timing, or respond to conditions in ways that are not identical. These differences are present within the data, yet they are not always easy to interpret without direct observation to provide context. The scale of the environment adds another layer of complexity. The ocean at these depths is vast, and the movements recorded by a tag represent only a narrow path through it. What lies just beyond that path, the distribution of prey, the presence of other organisms, remains outside the frame of measurement. The whale moves through a space that is only partially sampled, leaving gaps in understanding. Technological limitations continue to shape what can be known. Instruments must be small enough not to interfere with movement, durable enough to withstand pressure, and capable of storing or transmitting data under conditions that limit communication. Each of these requirements constrains what can be recorded, leaving certain aspects beyond reach. As a result, knowledge of these dives is built through inference. Patterns are identified, relationships are proposed, and conclusions are drawn from the consistency of the data. This approach provides a coherent picture, yet it remains incomplete, defined as much by what cannot be seen as by what can. Within this framework, the deeper behaviors of the whale exist at the edge of observation. The processes that unfold during each dive are known in outline, but not in full detail. The environment, the interactions, and the precise sequence of actions remain partially hidden, continuing to move beyond direct view, even as the tools used to study them grow more refined. Across repeated descents, a consistent pattern begins to emerge, not from a single observation, but from the accumulation of many dives traced over time. When these movements are viewed together, they reveal a gradual refinement in behavior, a shift toward greater focus as depth increases and conditions narrow what is effective. This pattern is visible in the structure of movement. Near the surface, motion can include variation, slight deviations in direction, and adjustments that are not strictly necessary for immediate success. As depth increases, these variations diminish. The path becomes more direct, with fewer corrections required to maintain alignment. Each movement appears to serve a clear purpose, contributing to a trajectory that remains stable over time. The reduction in wasted motion is not simply a matter of efficiency, but a response to the constraints encountered below. Energy, time, and available information all become more limited, and the body adapts by removing actions that do not directly support the task at hand. This refinement does not reduce capability. It enhances it by concentrating effort where it is most effective. Within this framework, the relationship between perception and movement becomes more tightly integrated. Each acoustic signal leads to an immediate adjustment, reducing the delay between detection and response. The sequence of actions forms a continuous flow, where information is translated into motion without interruption. This continuity supports precision, allowing the whale to maintain alignment with a target even as conditions change. The data collected from tagged individuals reflects this progression. Dive profiles show a transition from broader, less structured movement at shallower depths to more consistent patterns as the whale enters deeper zones. The spacing of clicks changes, movement becomes steadier, and the time spent within active hunting phases aligns with areas where prey is most likely to be found. As behavior becomes more focused, hunting success increases. This increase is not the result of greater speed or force, but of improved alignment between action and environment. The whale does not need to move faster to be effective. It needs to move in a way that matches the conditions it encounters. By reducing unnecessary variation, it increases the likelihood that each approach will result in contact. The pattern also reflects a form of learning that is not dependent on conscious adjustment, but on repeated exposure to the same conditions. Each dive reinforces the behaviors that lead to success, gradually shaping movement and perception into a more efficient system. Over time, these patterns become consistent, appearing across different individuals and locations. There is a coherence to this progression that extends beyond individual dives. The deeper the whale travels, the more its behavior aligns with the demands of that environment. The transition is smooth, not marked by sudden change, but by a steady narrowing of possibilities. What remains is a set of actions that function reliably within the constraints imposed by depth. This convergence toward focus does not eliminate flexibility. The whale retains the ability to adjust to unexpected changes, but these adjustments occur within a framework that prioritizes efficiency. The range of possible movements is reduced, yet the effectiveness of those movements increases. In this way, the deeper pattern reveals itself as a balance between limitation and refinement. The environment restricts what can be done, and within those restrictions, behavior becomes more precise. Each dive follows this trajectory, moving from broader variation toward concentrated action, where less is expended and more is achieved through the alignment of movement, perception, and timing. The shift is not an intention, but an outcome. As depth increases and conditions narrow, behavior begins to appear sharper, more decisive, shaped by constraints that remove excess and leave only what functions effectively. From the outside, this refinement can resemble an increase in intensity, yet it does not arise from a change in temperament. It emerges from alignment with an environment that permits little variation. In shallower conditions, there is space for adjustment, for minor inefficiencies that do not immediately affect the result. Movement can include small deviations, decisions can unfold with a degree of flexibility, and outcomes are not always determined by a single moment. As depth increases, this flexibility diminishes. The same actions must now operate within tighter limits, where the margin for error is reduced and the consequences of inefficiency become more immediate. This change shapes behavior toward precision. Each movement is directed with greater care, each adjustment made with the expectation that it must contribute directly to success. The whale does not become more forceful in a broad sense. It becomes more exact. The path it follows, the timing of its actions, and the way it commits to an approach all reflect a narrowing of possibilities rather than an expansion of aggression. Decisiveness emerges naturally within these conditions. The information gathered through sound is processed and acted upon without delay, not because of urgency alone, but because delay reduces effectiveness. The environment does not allow for extended evaluation or repeated attempts. Each opportunity must be resolved within a limited window, encouraging a direct transition from perception to action. Efficiency supports this decisiveness. By reducing unnecessary movement and aligning behavior with the demands of depth, the whale conserves the resources needed to complete each dive. This conservation is not passive. It actively shapes how the animal engages with its surroundings. Actions that do not contribute to a clear outcome are minimized, allowing focus to remain on what is most likely to succeed. The result is a pattern of behavior that appears more concentrated. Movements are smoother, more controlled, and directed towards specific goals. Interactions with prey unfold with fewer intermediate steps, compressing the sequence into a shorter, more defined interval. This compression gives the impression of increased intensity, though it is, in fact, the removal of excess that creates this effect. The environment itself enforces this refinement. Pressure, limited oxygen, and reduced visibility all contribute to a system where only certain approaches remain viable. Behaviors that might function in less constrained conditions are filtered out, leaving those that align closely with the requirements of depth. Over repeated dives, this filtering reinforces patterns that emphasize precision and efficiency. This alignment does not introduce new traits, but amplifies those already present. The whale's capacity for controlled movement, accurate perception, and efficient energy use becomes more evident as conditions demand their full expression. What might appear subtle near the surface becomes pronounced at depth, not because it has changed, but because it is now essential. In this way, the sense of something becoming more dangerous is tied to clarity rather than escalation. The whale does not adopt a different approach. It removes what is unnecessary, leaving a form of behavior that operates with minimal deviation. Each action leads directly to the next, guided by conditions that favor accuracy over variation. The deeper the descent, the more this pattern holds. The environment shapes behavior into a sharper form, not through added force, but through the steady narrowing of what can be done effectively. Within that narrowing, the whale's actions become more precise, more decisive, and more aligned with the demands of a space where only the most efficient patterns remain. Over time, the surrounding environment does more than set the stage for behavior. It quietly selects which patterns persist and which fade. In the case of deep diving predators, this influence extends beyond physical adaptation, shaping not only the structure of the body, but the structure of action itself. The ocean, particularly at depth, becomes a kind of filter, allowing only certain ways of moving and responding to remain effective. At the surface, variability is tolerated. Conditions shift, light is abundant, and space allows for a wider range of behaviors to succeed. Movement can include inefficiencies without immediate consequence, and decisions can unfold with a degree of flexibility. As descent progresses, this tolerance narrows. The deeper layers impose constraints that remove many of these options, leaving behind a more limited set of viable responses. Within this narrowing, behavior begins to align more closely with environmental demands. Actions that conserve energy, maintain stability, and translate perception into motion with minimal delay become favored. Over repeated dives, these patterns are reinforced, not through conscious choice, but through the consistent outcomes they produce. The ocean does not instruct, but it shapes through consequence. This shaping extends beyond individual movements into broader patterns of behavior. The timing of dives, the duration spent at certain depths, and the transitions between phases all reflect an adaptation to the distribution of prey and the limits of physiology. Each element adjusts to fit within a system where resources are finite and conditions are constant in their intensity. The result is a form of adaptation that is not solely physical. While the whale's body is built to withstand pressure and store oxygen, its behavior is equally tuned to operate within those limits. The coordination between these aspects creates a system where structure and action are closely aligned, each supporting the other in maintaining function at depth. The concept of the deep ocean as a behavioral filter becomes evident in this alignment. Behaviors that do not meet the demands of the environment are gradually excluded, not through a single event, but through repeated cycles where less effective patterns lead to reduced success. Over time, what remains is a set of actions that consistently produce favorable outcomes under the same conditions. This filtering does not produce uniformity. Individual variation persists, and each whale may express these patterns in slightly different ways. However, the underlying structure remains consistent, guided by the same constraints and shaped by the same pressures. The differences that do exist occur within a framework that has already been refined by the environment. The influence of the ocean extends into the integration of sensory systems and movement. The reliance on sound, the precision of motion, and the timing of actions all reflect a balance that has been shaped by repeated interaction with a space that offers little margin for error. Each component supports the others, forming a cohesive system that operates effectively within the constraints imposed by depth. In this way, the predator is not separate from its environment, but an expression of it. The behaviors observed are not arbitrary, nor are they independent of the conditions in which they occur. They are the result of continuous interaction, where the environment shapes the patterns that define success. The deeper regions of the ocean, with their stability and intensity, make this process more apparent. There is less variation in external conditions, and so the filtering effect becomes more pronounced. What remains is a set of behaviors that align closely with the demands of that space, refined through repetition and maintained through consistency. Within this framework, the whale moves not just through the ocean, but in accordance with it, its behavior shaped by the same forces that define the environment itself. Far below the reach of ordinary experience, the ocean settles into a state that resists easy description. Conditions there do not fluctuate in the way they do above, but hold steady, shaped by pressure, temperature, and the absence of light. As depth increases, these factors do not simply add difficulty, they redefine what is possible, narrowing the range of actions that can be sustained. Within this space, survival is not achieved through general capability alone. It requires a form of specialization that aligns precisely with the environment's demands. Organisms that inhabit these depths are not broadly adapted, but finely tuned. Their structures and behaviors shaped to operate within a narrow set of conditions that remain constant over time. The sperm whale moves through this space as one of the clearest expressions of that alignment. Its body carries the physical adaptations necessary to withstand pressure and conserve oxygen, while its behavior reflects a parallel refinement, guiding movement, perception, and timing into a coherent system. Each descent follows patterns that have been shaped by repeated interaction with the same constraints, producing actions that function reliably where few others can. As depth increases, the environment becomes less familiar in ways that extend beyond simple description. The absence of visual reference removes a primary point of orientation, while the uniformity of conditions reduces external variation. Space expands without clear boundaries, and movement occurs within a field that offers little distinction between one direction and another. In this setting, perception must rely on different principles, and behavior must adapt accordingly. The whale's reliance on sound provides continuity within this unfamiliar space. Acoustic signals define structure where none is visible, allowing the animal to navigate and hunt with precision. This system, already present at shallower depths, becomes increasingly central as other forms of perception diminish. It does not replace vision in a direct sense, but operates in a way that is suited to the conditions encountered below. What occurs during these dives remains largely unseen. The processes described through data and inference outline the structure of behavior, yet the full detail of each interaction is hidden within the environment itself. The sequence of movements, the exact responses of prey, and the subtle adjustments made in real time unfold beyond direct observation, leaving a portion of the narrative incomplete. This absence of direct view does not diminish the clarity of the patterns that emerge. The consistency of dive profiles, the repeatability of behaviors, and the alignment between structure and function all indicate a system that operates with precision. The unknown elements exist within this framework, not outside it, suggesting that what remains unseen follows the same underlying principles. As the whale descends further, the distance between its world and familiar experience continues to grow. The conditions it encounters diverge from those at the surface, shaping a reality that operates under different constraints. Within that divergence, adaptation becomes more pronounced, refining both body and behavior into forms that match the environment with increasing accuracy. The deeper the descent, the more complete this alignment becomes. Each element of the whale's biology and behavior supports the others, forming a system that functions effectively within a space defined by pressure, darkness, and limited resources. This coherence allows it to move through depths that would otherwise remain inaccessible, not by overcoming the environment, but by fitting precisely within it. In this way, the ocean at depth reveals a form of specialization that is both exact and enduring. The whale does not simply endure these conditions, it operates within them with a level of integration that reflects long adaptation. What exists below remains largely hidden, yet within that hidden space, the patterns of life continue, shaped by forces that favor precision over excess and alignment over variation.